Welcome to Subbrief's Naval News. An amphibious invasion fleet is taking shape in Chinese shipyards. A purpose-built series of 5 specialized Bailey Bridge beach landing barges are being constructed in Guangzhou, China. H.I. Sutton first reported on this story in his article on navalnews.com. You should go read it. It was published last week. He also recently published a YouTube video about 20 minutes long talking about how these ships work. I'll link that in the description. You should go watch it. It's worth your time. He compares these barges to the mulberry ports used by the Allies during the invasion of Normandy in World War II. But in this case, these barges would intentionally ground themselves in shallow water along the shorelines. Then a bridge would be lowered, and these bridges are between 300 feet and one as long as 500 feet to carry units from ship to shore quickly. A stern ramp is then lowered at the rear end of the barge where ferry ships can pull up and unload their cargo. And Chinese ferries are very different than, say, American and European ferries in that they are part of China's Civilian Military Fusion Initiative, which is a mandate that was passed years ago that all construction of ferries going forward will have dual-use capability. One example of this is the Bohai Ferry Fleet that is capable of transporting the weight and size of armored vehicles, equipment, personnel, and some supplies to keep them going ashore per ship. This was practiced and exercised in 2022. China conducted a landing exercise using a civilian ship as a ferry for military personnel and equipment. So they've got the gear, they've got the mandate, the law, if you will. They've been practicing this for years now with naval exercises, and we think that this is just another indication that they're getting ready to invade Taiwan. These are some of the ships that they're going to use. I would like to cover a couple of the likely landing sites. Now, they can land anywhere they want, but there's a few key landing sites that seem like would be much more likely to be used. The first one is in Hsinchu, Taiwan. The reason for this is that it's very close to the political capital of the island, Taipei, the city of Taipei. The terrain here is also less rugged than the northern territories just north of this location. So this is about as far north as you want to go and still have a good landing site. Now, some of the detractors here is that this area of the island is very heavily defended. This is where a lot of the military bases are, of course. That's where the capital is, and so you'd expect that. There's also limited amphibious landing sites compared to other locations, but with these new barges that they're building, they expand their options on amphibious landing locations. So that may not be a deterrent any longer. A second site is Taichung and Changhua, a relatively flat area down here in the midpoint of the west coast of the island. And this is very conducive to rapid mechanized movement, which is what these new barges are designed for. They're designed to have tanks, armored vehicles, any kind of vehicle really, roll off the ship, the ferry, through the barge, onto that bridge, and then 500 feet inland. And at this location, there are some key transportation highways, some as wide as 6 and 8 lanes running north and south. So if they can get to those highways that are very close to the coastline, they can quickly disseminate large number of forces from ship to shore and then cross the island. So, but again, the challenges here are this is a highly fortified area. It's well defended, as the rest of the island kind of is. But the farther south you go, the farther away from Taipei you get less and less of that. And then finally, all the way at the southern tip of the west coast of Taiwan, you have Tinian and Kaohsiung. Kaohsiung is the Taiwan's largest port and is critical to logistics supplies, so that if they want to occupy the island, which is the goal, they would need this port, or this would be the best port, to keep logistics and supplies flowing onto the island. So this is key. Also, Tinian is the culture and administrative hub for the southern region. So this is a very close-knit, community-based region that would likely resist any form of occupation. So a deterrent to occupying this, even though it would be critical that they do it, Chinese does this, they would see local resistance, civil disruption, possibly even rebel counterattack uprisings, I would expect to be conducted in this region if an occupation of this port and the city, this region, is attempted. Now, we do have recent examples of temporary piers being used. In this example, in the Eastern Mediterranean Sea, the United States established a temporary pier that was operational for only about 20 days before being removed. So this floating pier suffered damage due to sea currents and rough winds. High sea state kept breaking it apart. The pier had to be taken apart, removed essentially, and then reinstalled over and over again, limiting the number of days it was actually viable. So this pier was established in an unopposed location as well, in Gaza, with the assistance or the cooperation, if you will, of the Israeli government agreeing to not attack it. This pier was still only available for limited times due to environmental issues, high sea states breaking it apart. So if they try and use a tactic like this in a war zone where they have an opposed landing, they'll likely see these challenges and also be attacked. So in modern warfare, any stationary logistic point is going to see long fire shortly after it is established. So that's another consideration that China needs to take into account, is the moment they park one of these barges, they can expect artillery fire, whether it's HIMARS or something else, coming in on it. So the weather in this area of the world is favorable for these landings, even though it will always be a challenge, but it's most favorable in March of every year for about 60 days. Or they could wait until October of every year, where you get another about 60-day window of relatively calm seas historically. So these are the time frames that I'll be watching to see if there's any kind of buildup in the Chinese ports where they begin collecting these ferries together and then maybe start moving armored units onto the ferries. There's also, if they're going to do an invasion, likely to be a naval exercise accompanied with it. So there'll already be naval units at sea. They have 3 aircraft carriers. I would expect at least 2 and probably all 3 to be at sea during the landing operation. One way to mask that would be to have 2 carriers at sea doing dual carrier operation naval exercise, have the 3rd carrier in port with the ferry amphibious fleet, and it all rolls out together, bringing a total of 3 carriers and the amphibious invasion fleet all at once, going towards the west coast of China. Those are going to be the telltale signs. Those take days to collect all the equipment together with. So that's what the United States and everyone else is going to be watching for, is where are the carriers and what's happening in these ports. Now, China has been doing annual exercises, and last year they did it twice in 2024, called Joint Sword. Joint Sword is a combination Coast Guard and Chinese naval exercise in and around the area of Taiwan. CSIS, that's the Center for Strategic and International Studies, has a great series on this. I recommend you go over there and check them out. I'm using some of their graphics here from their fantastic China Power lecture. So the Chinese maritime quarantine is probably going to be attempted before any kind of invasion is attempted. And the way this will work is China will announce to the world, to all the maritime shipping companies out there, give them about 48 hours of notice would be a typical window, that China is now going to conduct enhanced custom inspections on any vessel entering or leaving Taiwan ports. So these shipping companies will have to submit custom declaration paperwork to Chinese authorities before entering Taiwanese waters. This will be a new and significant law enforcement action, and that's why they have the 48-hour window to get ready for it. And then after that 48 hours expires, that's the new policy. Everybody must comply. So this will allow Chinese law enforcement to board vessels for on-site inspections. Now, they probably won't board every single ship that goes into Taiwan, but they can board at their leisure anyone that they choose to. Shipping companies that do not comply, that don't file the customs declaration and attempt to port anyway, will be fined by China. That's the penalty for not doing this. So the way this will work operationally, if you want to look at the map here, is the Chinese naval assets will be out away from the island, and legally they will not be involved in a customs inspection or operation because that is a legal action. Only the Chinese Coast Guard, a legal authority, can perform those actions. If a military or a navy were to do those actions, that would be something more along the lines of a blockade, which is an act of war. The key here is to keep it all legal and from a law enforcement perspective, even if it is a charade. which it certainly is. So the Chinese Navy will localize the shipping with radar, get their location, and then report that to the Chinese Coast Guard that will be pre-positioned, 20 to 30 miles away from shore to do these inspections. It is expected that if China announces this type of program, as much as 75% of shipping companies may not want to deal with it and just go on to other ports. And that would significantly and negatively impact everyone on Taiwan, losing that much shipping. So, Center for Strategic International Studies has additional scenarios on this. You should go to csis.org and check them out. I don't want to talk about all of their ideas. I leave that for you to discover on your own. So, I do want to leave you with this, though. If conflict between China and the United States occurs, our life here in the United States will be impacted. We'll feel the negative impacts of this war. So like Chinese state operators, for example, called Typhoons here by U.S. law enforcement, gained access to the Department of Treasury files and workstations in December 2024. That's just a few weeks ago. And I would guarantee that many of you watching this didn't even know this happened, because the Treasury Department only informed Congress, one, because they were required to, and then they waited till December 30th, the day where we're all getting ready to celebrate a new year and not paying attention to the news, to publicly inform Congress and the public by extension that this breach had occurred. Our Department of Treasury, the department that runs and manages our nation's financial institutions, has been compromised. And it's not the only one. In January, going back a year, January 2024, the then director of the FBI, Christopher Wray, testified before Congress that Chinese hackers, state-sponsored hackers called Volt Typhoon, infiltrated critical infrastructure such as power grid networks, water treatment plant facility networks, with the potential to wreak havoc on those systems. So, conflict with China will not be risk-free. It will not be as clean and clinical as other wars we've participated in recently, whether it's Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, the list goes on, Mali, Somalia, Mozambique, Kenya. None of these countries have had the ability to strike the United States the way China does. And it's not going to be a direct attack from China on the United States. It's not going to be a missile attack or a nuke, at least not on day one. What it will likely be on day one, should we get involved in this, is a cyber attack that shuts down power, water treatment plants, our banking system, and possibly things like healthcare hospital networks that are always getting compromised and being locked out of their system. We can expect to see things like that happen. So just be aware that these kinds of disruptions can and most likely will happen if we get involved. And just be prepared for that so you're not surprised when it does happen. And on that note, I would ask that you support our channel here by clicking on the Patreon link right here on the screen so we can bring you more stories like this. And we have a lot more details on the Patreon. I always put additional notes over there for you. So I do appreciate any support you have by clicking the link. Have a great day, everybody.